There are some people who are thinking about maybe creating a way to buy a team or become an owner. What have you noticed amongst, owners that some of the real smart ways of doing business, or maybe some of the ways that led to an incredible downfall? The longer I'm in business, the more I see revenue streams pretty much everywhere. But when I first started, I'm thinking, oh, well, the way they make their money obviously is ticket sales or potentially just like through TV. But now I'm seeing many revenue streams. So my name is Mike Fallett. I own the #1 book creation service for entrepreneurs known as Dream Starters Publishing, and I want to help you bring your story to life in a book so you can use that book to generate leads and attention for your business. Contact me today. Welcome to another episode of $1 Million Stories, where we get to interview authors from all over the world. I love talking to authors because they have the courage to take their thoughts, their stories, their lessons, put it down in a piece of paper, and share it with the many, ultimately changing their legacy and destiny in the process. And if you're looking to write a book out there, check out Dream Starters Publishing. We can help you out with wherever you're at in the process. And if you have a book, you want to generate leads with that book so you can grow that business of yours, check out bookmarketingcrm.com. Now, this episode is perfect for anybody out there who wants to maybe get a little bit more financial IQ, maybe financial literacy, so they can maybe take advantage of opportunities that are around them, but also maybe if you're a parent and you want to teach your kids about this. I know that Rich Dad Poor Dad changed my perspective on assets, liabilities, wealth creation. So the sooner the better. And that's why this next guest is perfect for anybody out there who wants to boost maybe their financial acumen. And so the book that we're talking about is called Sport Finance. And one of the authors is with us, Mike Mondello. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Hey, great to be here, Mike. I appreciate the invite.
Well, you're a sports guy. We were just talking about hockey. Are you in Florida? Is that where you're at, or?
I'm in Tampa, yeah.
Yep. Okay. So I'm in Pittsburgh. We're both in cities where our team was knocked out of the playoffs. We don't have a chance, so we can actually be friends on this call. And I want to start off with the genesis of this book. What made you want to write it? And if you can give a quick little background on where you come from and what got you to where you're at now.
Sure. So in my previous life, I was a college basketball coach, and I enjoyed doing that. I played a little bit in high school, a little bit in college. Thought I was going to go be a basketball coach, and we did that for a few years. I was in Gainesville and decided like I didn't want to put my livelihood in the hands of 18, 19-year-old players and decisions. So thought I would go back to get a graduate degree and teach. And so 30 some years ago, I got my PhD at University of Florida and started teaching. And I felt like what really drove me was being able to help students fulfill their dreams and careers. And so I spent 10 years at University of Florida, there teaching, getting my PhD. Then I transitioned over to Florida State University, spent 12 years there, and then came down here to USF in Tampa in 2012. And that's really when I was invited to join on the project with the book. So the book had been out for two editions. One of the authors decided it was time for him to jump off the book. And so I knew one of the other co-authors, and they invited me to join the book. And so we just released our 5th edition. And, Mike, the book is really geared for undergraduate sport management students, sport business students. But we found is now that the book is being picked up by entrepreneurs, people who want to go work in the sports industry, because the financial piece is something that's always evolving and changing. And what's challenging about the book is this is our 5th edition now, is you have to revise it every couple of years. And as soon as you put it on paper, it almost becomes outdated because things are happening so quickly in this field. But so it's a book I think has got a large audience in terms of undergraduate and graduate students. And again, some folks in the industry. It's a quick story. The owner of the Tampa Bay Lightning, Jeff Vinik, who is affiliated with our sport business program here at USF, when he turned 50, he was deciding what was his next career going to be. He was a hedge fund manager, was in the finance world, was an analyst, but felt like he needed something else in his next phase of his life. And so he literally decided he was going to go buy a hockey team. And one of the things he did is he Googled, how do you buy a hockey team? And so
That's
he had the
amazing.
money, he had the time, and he then led him to go read a bunch of sport business books. And now he's been the owner and one of the most successful owners in pro sports. So but the book's been a great project for me to work on. It helps keep me relevant, and it's been great with good colleagues.
Well, I'm in some circles with business owners who have some very unique businesses, and I realize that pretty much anything can be a business, and I guess the core principles are always the same, no matter what, right? When it comes to balance sheets and profit and loss statements. So I'm always blown away by how some people have turned something that seems so complicated into a thriving cash flowing business. I'm assuming when it comes to owning a business in the sports world, it's no different. And so you never realize that the wealthy multimillionaires or billionaires are actually going to Google to see how they can become an owner. And it's just that simple. So it seems like you have a roadmap that can help people understand it. And financial literacy, I think, is maybe it's not at an all-time low. Maybe it's always just been low, but I'm really aware of it since I was able to see both sides. You know, um, the blue collar world where I come from, and then going into these rooms with multimillionaires and some billionaires. It's just how they view money very different. And it's like they see how it can produce all their dreams. And some people, get money and then they pay bills, or they buy liabilities. Other people buy assets, then those assets pay for liabilities. So if you could break down maybe what you're seeing out there when it comes to financial literacy, do you think that the education system is responsible? Do you believe it's the family structure? You think it's just culture in general? I just don't think a lot of people understand money.
Yeah, I think it's all the above. And I really wish more high schools, even middle schools, would start early on talking and teaching to young people about money, because it's going to impact them for the rest of their lives. Whether they go be an entrepreneur, a business person, whatever they do for their career, just managing personal finances is such a big deal. I know here at University of South Florida, I'm in the business school, but it's not mandatory, obviously, for students to go through USF and get a degree and take any financial literacy course, although I wish it would be. It needs to be something that is instilled good habits early on. And I see so many young people who they don't really understand. They just know mom and dad can provide to them. And then when they get out on their own and realize, wow, this is really challenging to make a balance sheet work, or my own personal financial statement work. I think we're doing better, but we can do a lot more. And with technology now, it's so easy to self-teach yourself about some of the basics of finance. And, one of the things you mentioned, whether you're starting a business, whether you run a donut shop, or you want to go buy a sports team, some of the same financial principles really remain the same, right? I mean, you got to think about cash flow, you got to think about income statements, you got to think about expenses. There's only so many ways you can generate revenue. So what are new revenue streams going to look like? So some of the things we talk about in the sport finance world are really applicable to the general finance world as well.
And I think that the longer I'm in this game, the more I understand that financial literacy, or even just being aware of certain statements, you become more refined. There is no level of mastery where you basically everything is done, right? So like when I started a business, it was like I reviewed my cash flow, my income statement, my balance sheet once a year. And then as time goes on, you have a little bit more time to focus on it. Therefore, you can grow your business. And maybe it's twice a year. And then it's every quarter. And then it's maybe once a month. And then it starts to get a little bit more refined once a week, even. So I realize that it doesn't happen overnight, but it is a journey. And so I think the longer you're in this game, the more you understand money. Maybe you start to see how you can make these chess moves that produce not only financial freedom, but freedom in general. So
Yeah.
I know what good.
I was going to say, like, in my class that I teach, it's a sport finance class, but we're fortunate in that most of the students that I get in the second year, they've already got it, they've already received an MBA. So they've had some background in the financial literature. But I still spend at least one class talking about investments in the stock market and asset allocation, and how you can position yourself with early investing and thinking about compound interest for lifelong lessons, right? And I think that's really important for people to start learning. Even if it sounds funny, but just learn how to budget $100 a month and figure out, how's that going to work and how's that going to grow, and understanding that time is your best friend. And so, trying to convince someone who's 21 years old to take $15 and not go to Chipotle and eat, maybe save on food and start early investing, it really does pay off. And sometimes those habits are tough to figure out. I use an example. there's a lot of stores who make more money on credit card interest just on the interest payments of the fees than they do selling their goods. And it's like, if people could understand that, that would be a huge thing. In other words, you go to a Best Buy and you got to have the new latest, greatest TV. And so you spend $1,000 on the TV, and they, teach you to say, well, you can only pay $15 and walk out of the store. And then you don't realize that you're going to end up paying $1,800 or more for a television. And those are the kind of things that people don't think about in the big picture. But I think if we can get people on good habits early on, one of the things, Mike, that my students they don't really understand is they get surprised when I tell them that I have a financial advisor. And they're like, why would you have a financial advisor? You teach this stuff. I said, I have a financial advisor because it takes the emotion out of me. I'm a competitive person. I want to succeed. I want my assets to do well. I want my investments to do well. But with another set of eyes and ears, right, looking at my things, they're not as invested as I am. I want them to be invested to some degree, but it's just another person to help me make decisions that sometimes you got to think up here, not always down with your heart. And so I think finance is not, people make it more complicated than it needs to be. There's a book out there that I'm sure you've heard about it, Habits of Millionaires. And basically the person who wrote that, it's a dated book, but it's still, he just went around and talked to people who they basically had the same earning potential, the same earning income, and yet some people achieved great wealth and others didn't do very well at all. And it's just, the simplest thing was they paid themselves first. They saved money, and then they did what they had left over. And the people who didn't have any money would spend, and then try to save, and it doesn't work that way.
Right.
And so I think these are the simple life principles that if we could instill early on with young people, I think they would be far better off.
Man, you said a couple magic ingredients there, guys. If you're paying attention, number one, it's the little small habits when you're a student, doing the $15 a month, doing $15 a day, whatever it is, start to stock it away. Little habits add up to the big habits. And obviously then that becomes, something that you're able to produce an incredible harvest, because time, like you said, is your best friend. So I look at time as it's your greatest asset if you do the right things, right? So if you plant the seeds and you wait 4 seasons, you're gonna have the fruit. So time becomes a true asset, but also the mentorship, right? Having an outsider who's not in your world, so you're not drawn into all these battles, right? Everything's in front of you at all times, so you're constantly emotionally involved. And so you're making all these decisions, and having someone who's going to ask you questions based off of all the decisions you made, what a game changer. And that's something that I've implemented quite a bit. So great nuggets there. But you do talk about in your book, it says, reviewing financial statements, planning, building a financial strategy to help guide decisions to create, expand, or exit a sport business organization. Now, obviously, I don't think everybody listening to this podcast is going to get into the sports world, but I've always said, build your business. And by the way, I've always said in the past maybe 3 years, build your business as if you're going to exit, even if you don't have a plan to sell your business. Building it to exit, you're going to build it in a way that's so scalable as compared to just building it around you. So any advice when it comes to this section of your book?
Yeah. I think, when you think about building a business, I think you got to have a time horizon in mind. And I think one of the challenging parts right now with a lot of people entering the workforce is they're not patient. And so they want titles, and they want to get to certain levels. They want to think, they see someone who's at a C level and doesn't realize that person has worked for 15, 18, 20 years, probably had to, change 3 or 4 times within an organization, different roles, different titles. I think that like finance takes time, so does achieving things in your career. And yet a lot of people want things immediately. They want it now. So I think that's one of the things that we talk about in the sports book is, your revenue streams some of them are constant, but some of them are constantly changing as well. And so you see some organizations that have been they're not the first or second movers, and they're behind. They don't react. They don't think proactively. and all of a sudden they're having real problems. And it's the same thing in a sports team, and business in general. Is you got to kind of plan ahead and think ahead. And I think putting your financial hat on early on about different steps and different goals, 3, 5 years out, is really important to do. For us, revising this book has to take place every 3 or 4 years because everything is changing so quickly. I wish I could write a history book. It wouldn't have to revise it very
Yeah,
often, right?
right.
I mean, it's good information, but you think about analytics and how finance and those topics are so every day we're getting more data. Someone said to me, the amount of data that we're having is doubling every 2 years. That's a scary thought. And if you're not staying ahead of that and thinking about ways, your business is just going to get passed by quickly.
So I would assume that maybe the people who are in your class are going to be a part of an organization and therefore just understanding the details financially. But there are some people who are thinking about maybe creating a way to buy a team or become an owner, or maybe that is the ultimate goal of some of your students. So what have you noticed amongst, owners that some of the real smart ways of doing business, or maybe some of the ways that led to an incredible downfall? And the reason why I bring that up is because uh, the longer I'm in business, the more I see revenue streams pretty much everywhere. But when I first started, I'm thinking, oh, well, the way they make their money, obviously, is ticket sales or potentially just like through TV. But now I'm seeing many, many, many revenue streams. So the smart ones, like you're saying, when it comes to Tampa Bay, what made him great? Was it the fact that he invested for the long term? Was it the fact that he knew the system in and out when it comes to the right people? Therefore, he can create affiliates and allies in the right spots. What are some of the signs of great leaders in this world, and then the ones who maybe will take on too much debt and potentially crush it?
Yeah, it's a great question. You think about professional sports, and in some ways, college sports are starting to mirror that, which is not great. But if you think about the pro sports spectrum, if you're an owner, what's your motivation, right? Some owners, their motivation is to win championships and be competitive, and other owners, it's to profitability is driving them. And some owners try to do both. And I think as a fan, you would want your owner to try to win and be competitive and field a competitive team. And so I think the owners that, most owners in professional sports did not make their wealth owning the team. They made it in an outside entity, and then they came in and decided it was the right time to buy a franchise. What makes it unique is there's only we have a limited supply. And so we've seen franchise values go up incrementally in, double digits for many years consecutively, because it's just there's only so many teams that are available on the market. That, an NFL team one or two may come on the market every 2 or 3 years, and yet there's always buyers looking to buy teams, but it's difficult to get into the entry. One of the things we're seeing now, Mike, is because the value of these teams has gotten so high, is we're seeing private equity and now become a big player in sports. And what I'm saying by that is instead of having one owner, a team might have a principal owner, but they may sell off 10 or 15% of their team because it's an investment for someone else that doesn't correlate much with what else they might have in their portfolio. And there's very few people that can spend, $5 or $6 billion for a team or more. And so if I can just go buy 5 or 6 or 8% of a team as an investor, that's an opportunity that wasn't available to me, 10 years ago. And so the NFL has kind of been reluctant to do that model, but they're now starting to entertain ideas about it, where we've seen this in other leagues. I think what Jeff Vinik did when he purchased the Lightning, at the time, there was 2 other NHL franchises on the market. And as an analyst, he just did really a cost benefit analysis of what market did he feel would work. And most people thought he was crazy to go start and buy a franchise in the NHL and put it in Florida. Like, that doesn't even make sense, right? I mean, it's a winter sport. It's not something that's here. We already had NFL, and college football is a big deal here. So when you look at the competitors, but he felt he could make it a go. It worked out great. But I will tell you, I think the good owners are the ones that also give back to the community. They're not just takers. They realize that they have to be proactive. They got to be active. They got to be present. It's hard to be an owner of a team if you're not there, if you're not visible. why should your fans come support you and spend their hard-earned money on tickets and merchandise if you're not around and supporting the team as well? And so I think it's important to be present. It's important to understand that if a community is going to support you financially, that you need to be trying to do all you can to win and give back and do things that are popular back to the community. You know, one of the things that we talk about to some degree in the book is stadium financing, right? And this idea of who should pay for stadiums. You know, what a lot of people don't realize is in businesses, a lot of businesses get tax breaks. You know, they get things called tax abatements, where it's an incentive for maybe Amazon to put a distributorship in some place in northern Ohio because they get a break on taxes and land and so forth. But in a trade-off, they're going to hire a certain percentage of their workforce from local people. Well, sport teams do that as well, in that they want public dollars to pay for the stadium, but that's become a more difficult challenge to get these referendums passed. So the good owners, I think, that are present in the community do a much better job, and they're probably owners that can get better help financially from the public if indeed they're trying to get a new stadium built. Obviously I'm talking because that's been an ongoing issue here in Tampa with the Rays for 15, 18 years. So we'll see what happens with that.
That's a great point. It's almost as if the owner has to be a symbol of wanting to win. The people rally behind the owner. So I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We truly rallied behind the Pittsburgh Penguins because Mario Lemieux was at the helm. He's still part owner, but he was one of the main owners before. And so we love Mario Lemieux here because he saved the team twice, and we get behind him even more. Now, contrast that with Bob Nutting from the Pittsburgh Pirates. I don't know if you're familiar with the Pittsburgh Pirates here, but they haven't been good for many years, and it almost seems like he's not even trying to win. I think they're doing pretty well this year. I'm not a big Pirates fan, but you see these incentives and rewards in place based off of they're already making money even before the season starts because of the TV agreements. And so I look at that and say, well, maybe he's not trying to win, but he's trying to become profitable. I don't think the true, or maybe the true fans, the real diehard Pittsburgh Pirate fans will always go no matter what. But other fans would support the Pirates way more if he was out there and being a symbol of, I want to do everything in our power to win this championship. So that's an awesome takeaway. Never even thought about that, because you'd figure the owner just, pays the bills and the team, you get behind the team. But no, the real killers in this game, whether it's the Bob Krafts of the world, people rally behind the owners just as much as the team.
They do. And there's one of I talk to my students all the time about these myths that are out there in the financial world and the sport financial world. And one of them is, well, ticket prices are high because player salaries are high. And it's the other way around, right? It's the player salaries are high because people are willing to pay those prices for tickets and media rights. So we just saw for the first time, maybe 3 years ago, that media rights have now become the top revenue producing line item for pro sports teams. It always used to be ticket sales. And the NFL is an anomaly, right? I mean, they get so much money from their national television rights that if they sell tickets, it's great. They want fans in the stadium to create an atmosphere. But if you just take the NFL, the amount of money that each team gets distributed based on the national television deal, it covers their entire player payroll and probably most of their expenses for their organization. So, the NFL is an outlier, but other teams still need to rely, on ticket sales and merchandise to run a profitable business. The NHL, the Lightning, first couple of years when Jeff Vinik owned the team, they were losing money. And it took a long time, if he was pretty transparent about some of their finances, and it wasn't until 4 or 5 years in that they were able to run a sustainable business that was profitable. And most of the time it took them at least to get to the playoffs to turn a profit. But he was okay with that, right? Because his idea was, if I break even running the business, I'm okay with that, because down the road, when I go to sell the business, right, if you do a good business, it's going to be worth more than what you paid for it. And he could make that difference when he goes to sell the team.
Now, there's a guy that we follow in the real estate space. His name is Pace Morby. He always talks about creative financing. And so in this world, I think that you can get very creative. And so when it comes to contract structure or how things are separated on the balance sheet, whatever. I think that there are ways that you can get very creative in this world that you can't in any other industry. So when it comes to even one of your chapters about assets and liabilities, and so uh, I guess you look at players obviously as assets, but when it comes to creative financing, anything that you've seen or researched or found out that is kind of mind blowing that maybe people who are listening could apply it to their own business or figure out, wow, I could maybe pay for that, or I could figure out how to own that if I do X, Y, and Z, such as what you outline. Anything that stands out?
Well, what we saw maybe 10 years ago, owners started depreciating their players. And that was something that was new, right? The value of depreciating, it's a depreciating asset. And so I think that's something that everybody can look at now is, how are we, what can we do legally within the rules of taxes and so forth? And depreciation is obviously something everybody can do with their business. I think the one thing that the sports teams are also getting way wiser on is contract length, right? And so they're figuring out, you know, the first contract that a professional athlete signs has some stipulations and some ceilings based on the league rules. And oftentimes, after maybe a 5 or 7 year window, pro athletes are kind of hitting their ceiling. They're right in their peak of their career. And what was happening is a lot of pro sports teams were re-signing players after a 7 or 8 year run, thinking they were going to get the same kind of productivity. It doesn't work that way. And oftentimes they're disappointed because they're signing these free agents. They're thinking they're going to get the same type of productivity from a player. And, Father Time catches up with all of us. And these pro athletes, once they get into the early 30s, we oftentimes see, pretty significant reduction in their abilities to perform at the same level.
Hmm. So I would assume that you're looking at mostly like what the big three or big four sports industries, whether it's baseball, basketball, hockey, football, right? When you also probably look at golf or maybe tennis or even what's the other big ones out there? I don't know if it's horse racing, all that. But is there any one or two that stand out as the most profitable, the most incredible bang for your buck if you get into this world? I'm starting to
Yeah, I would
see.
say the
Yeah,
one
go ahead.
that probably gets overlooked, but certainly is not, people in the finance world understand is the English Premier League. The soccer league over across the way in London. I mean, that's the English Premier League is just it's if you look at the most valuable franchises, most valuable sports assets, it's the NFL, but the EPL is not far behind. And part of the reason you see that is because they have a separation of ownership and management, which I think would be fantastic in the US model, but we don't have that. In other words, there can be multiple owners of teams, and if the team isn't being run well as a public unity, they have to answer to a board. There can be changes, right? So teams get invested, and the fans have a little more say in the operations and the control. And the English Premier League and it's done quite well here in the US with broadcasting rights and everything else. But I've been fortunate to travel the world with my job, and I've been over to England, parts of England multiple times, and I can promise you that the enthusiasm for the English Premier League it dwarfs probably what people don't, the NFL here. It's a big deal. The other thing that makes it different over in their model is they have promotion and relegation. So if you think about it, like, one thing that makes sport different and unique in terms of ownership and structure than most businesses is sports need competitors to have a league. The NFL can't operate if only 2 or 3 teams exist, right? You need 32 teams to have a league. But if you think about Walmart and Target and big operations like that, they are trying to create monopolies and are not necessarily looking to have competitors. And so it's a different model. And in the English Premier League, if you don't perform to a certain level each year, you get relegated. And so if you get relegated down to the lower level, it's a big financial hit. It's a big hit in terms of your media. And so I think in some ways, the English Premier League model is a great way to run a sports league. We don't have that necessarily here in the US. And most US sport leagues financially are trying to help each other, right? They create incentives to try to get balance and parity among the competition. that's what makes the NFL so successful, not only financially, but every 3 or 4 years, teams that were not in the playoffs are now in the playoffs, and teams that were and so as a fan, you can kind of get excited and behind that, knowing that, wow, my team can still be good 3 years from today.
Yep.
In baseball, it doesn't work that way. Right now, you can look at the baseball standings and you can probably, we're May 1st and there's a half a dozen teams that you could basically eliminate from the postseason.
Yeah,
I mean, you just
that's the
could.
truth. Yeah, it's pretty crazy how. All right, so you're saying that, yeah, like football, you notice that maybe that's a little bit more competitive, so it's structured a certain way. But same, like hockey's getting way better at that. The way they put it together, probably realizing that an expansion team that comes into a city, they need to front load that. Therefore, there's a built-in demand. There's still belief in it. Very much like what they did with the Vegas Knights. Back in the day, they had expansion teams that would suck for 10, 15, 20
Yeah.
years. And so they fixed that, right? But they also fixed it maybe lopsided. And so it's almost like, if it's an expansion team, like they're putting together. I think they're doing it in, I forget where they're putting one in at. But regardless, I think it's in Utah. Pretty sure there's
Yeah.
one in Utah. They're going to make that an extreme team. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of changes they've made, and maybe some of them very good, some of them very bad, because it takes away from the teams that already have a fan base, I guess.
Well, and you look at, there's some leagues in the professional ranks, they have salary caps. So the NHL, the NBA, they have salary caps. Now that doesn't mean every owner spends to the cap like they should. They've done that here in Tampa. The ownership here has always made it like, we're going to do our part. We're going to spend exactly all the way to the cap. In fact, the general manager of the Tampa Bay Lightning, he's a friend of mine. I know him well. He's well respected. I think his cap he was like literally within like $25 of the salary cap of his salaries of his team. So, and the problem is right now, Mike, is what we're seeing is the Lightning went all in for a 5 or 6 year stretch where we're kind of on the back end of that. And I think what's happening is because they tried to win and they had success, but in doing so, to try to win now, you sacrifice down in the future. And so they've given up some draft picks that their team doesn't, they haven't been able to build as quickly as other teams. And I think this is a great lesson in finance, is sacrifice some things down the road. If you can just delay that gratification, save your money, figure out ways to put money aside, and then, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, you've got a nice nest egg in your retirement. And it's hard to do. It takes discipline, but it's the people that do it well are so far better off.
Yep. Now, something that I'm seeing when it comes to golf and boxing. So I'm somewhat of a big boxing fan, and I'm noticing that the Saudis are getting very, very involved with this, putting on amazing fights, right? Stuff that they can't do in the United States, putting together two different, I guess, fighters from different, I don't know, there's like top rank representation. There's De La Hoya, Golden Boy. So it's like, it's fighters from different backgrounds, but they're able to put on amazing fights. Also, when it comes to golf, I'm starting to see incredible golfers go to live. And so, are you noticing any type of trend that's happening that is pretty wild I guess, in the sport finance industry when it comes to this?
Yeah, I can't speak to as much on the boxing angle. I'm a little bit more familiar with the golf, partly because the PGA has headquarters here in Florida, and I've had some alumni work for them. Um, it's tough. We all sit there and say what we would do in our life, but when it's presented to us, it's sometimes not always the easiest decision to make, right? You think about, I know a lot of friends of mine who say they support their church, and yet when it's time to make a donation or a collection, they've got alligator arms, right? So, I think what we're seeing in golf is there was a lot of PGA players who were initially against the Live Tour. They were rebelling against it. They weren't supporting it. And that was maybe 4 years ago when this whole idea came about. And now here we are today, and 3 or 4 of those players have decided to join Live. And
Yep.
so everybody's probably got a price tag financially. What would it take to get you to move? And look, at the reality is I like following golf. Tiger Woods did amazing things for the sport in terms of elevating the media attention, the watch factor, the TV ratings. when he's not playing, it definitely seems to impact it. But if you look at what's going on now, some of the golfers can go play on the Live Tour, even if they don't win a tournament based on their guarantee to what they're getting, they're making more money than some of the folks who are successful on the PGA Tour, right? And so I think some fans have a problem with maybe where the funding and financing is coming from, but I don't know if you asked me to make a buy, sell, or hold on the Live Tour right now, I think at best I'd be maybe a hold. I don't think I'd be a buyer. I think it's still a lot of evolving things have to happen, but you know, it did force the PGA, and this is a good analogy to your folks who are business folks, is it did force the PGA to think about competition, and maybe they got a little. So when organizations get complacent, it's one of the worst things that can happen. We've seen a lot of things in family-owned businesses. There's been some research that shows that family-owned businesses, if it's doing great with the first generation, it seems to do really well in the next generation. But by the time it gets to that third generation, you start noticing major slippage. And so sometimes complacency can be a real problem, and it happens in business, it happens in sports, and so I think you got to really guard against that.
Yeah, great point. Competition has increased. I think that's going to produce a better product for the fans. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good thing. It's very much like in the world of wrestling. I don't know if you follow wrestling, but sports entertainment, if there's no competition, usually it gets to a point where, oh, this is all I have. They don't really need to fight and try to get my attention. They're going to have it. But once there's competition, that's when you see the best. So also, in your book, you talk about this $2 team. I want to really bring this up because it made me think of Rich Dad Poor Dad's Cash Flow Quadrant, the game. I think it's called, yeah, Cash Flow, the game. And I'm thinking if you can gamify it, kids or students will learn at a much higher rate. So, what is the $2 team?
So I think you're asking me about a part of the book that I probably didn't write.
Okay.
So I just can't comment on that. So I'm not going to try to tell you what that is. I don't know.
Because I'm looking at this. By the way, guys, if you go and check out this part of the book, it says the web resource also includes an interactive simulation called the $2 team that directly engages students with the book's topics, including assets and liabilities, revenue, expenses, budgeting, cash management, and borrowing. So I thought maybe it's a game on how to,
Yeah,
grow a team from
I think
nothing. I thought
the
that was pretty
genesis
fascinating.
behind that is to try to get people, because we're all, look at everybody that's now in middle schools, that all they've known is smartphones. So they're tech savvy, it's incredible. But I think what's get lost is, Mike, is that even though we're more tech savvy than we've ever been, people in middle school and high school, while they don't want to go through and learn Excel and learn an Excel spreadsheet, they need to understand what it means. And so, like, I don't teach time value of money anymore on calculations and here's how you do it, but it's important that you understand why a dollar today is worth less than a dollar in the future, kind of thing, right?
Yes.
So, I think that what the simulation we did in the book is just an easy way for someone to think about, bidding on value and having a fixed set of cash, and how are you going to allocate that? It's kind of like a fantasy football thing. And even fantasy football is great because you have to think about strategizing of what's the best way to use my pool of money. If I have a fixed balance of money, what's the best way to get my best return on my money, right? Do I go spend a third of my money to get a marquee player, or am I better off trying to have more diversification with 5 or 6 good players?
Hmm. Well, last question I have for you is, your own strategy, obviously outside of the book, when it comes to just, asset building or wealth creation, what is your game plan? And the reason why I bring that up is I just saw a quote the other day. It said, taxes are not taught in school because if they did teach that, everybody would become a conservative. And I'm like, oh, that makes so much sense. The more I understand taxes, the more I understand, obviously, protecting my finances, but also I'm also seeing how the politicians, their strategy. Oh, if they just print more money, the dollar goes down. I need to protect it. So let me invest in assets that actually appreciate once they actually print the money. So I'm starting to see these games being played out in the open, and I try to educate the $1 Million Circle or anybody listening to this podcast what I'm doing. So, is there anything that you recommend when it comes to what you're seeing or what you're implementing? Obviously, it's not financial advice, but anything that you're noticing or maybe recommending to people.
Well, look, cryptocurrency, we touch on it a little bit in the book. I don't understand it. I know what it is. I never thought it was something that was going to be long sustaining. I think there was too many question marks behind it. It's one of those things where a lot of things are, if you're just learning about it now, you've already missed the opportunity to make money on it. I think it's really, what I try to give people who don't want to deep dive into this is, think about time, right? And time on your side. And the earlier you can think about building wealth is, there's a saying, it's like you want to learn, earn, and return. So I'm trying to I'm still learning, but I'm also now in that return phase where, I want to be able to give back and support either worthy causes or nonprofits that I think are of interest to me and helpful for me. That's where I like to try to be philanthropic in some ways. And I think one way to think about that is you can't take the same investing thesis your entire life. It doesn't, I mean, some people try that. I don't think it's smart. You have to think about time, right? I invested differently in my 20s and 30s and even part of my 40s. I'm 55 now. So I'm probably 5 years away from retiring. As much as I love what I'm doing and I love making a difference with students, that's kind of my time horizon is 5 more years. Maybe it goes longer. I don't know. But the idea being is now I'm thinking about wealth preservation. And so I'm trying to take things that are a little bit less risky. I'm less exposed in the market. I might be more on fixed assets. And I think as you think about moving through, a 30 or 40-year career of building your wealth, you got to change accordingly. And again, that's hard to try to instill in young people today, because they read about the person who's 25 and an instant millionaire, but they don't read about the 9 other people who did the same thing, but it didn't work out, right? And so time is your friend, and if you just make good, smart decisions, you can do really well with all of this.
Yeah, your risk tolerance has to change
Yeah.
as you age, and liquidity aspect, right? You want to have access to it in your 60s and 70s so you can actually utilize it or
Yeah, I mean,
set it
nobody
up for your
knows. I
generational
mean,
wealth.
you hear stories now about, is Medicare going to be around in 10 years? Is Social Security paying out to the same level in 5 or 7 years? I think, you don't want to rely on those. If those come back and they're still there, that's great. But I think you got to think about how am I going to build my own situation the best I can.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we share the same sentiment on fixed assets, tangible hard assets. Crypto, it's a speculative game. Who knows where it's going to go? Will we see the true benefits? I don't know. It's still so up in the air, and obviously it goes up and down weekly, and we'll see where it goes. Bitcoin has the best chance of all of them, but there's many coins out there, so
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. I just don't have a lot of faith in many coins, so yeah, take your shot, I guess, if you want, but buy hard assets. Therefore, people always value it. Anyways, guys, the book is called Sport Finance. He has, I think this is the 4th edition. It's updated, so if you want to take a look at it, and
Fifth edition.
the $2 team. I want to, guys, if
Yeah.
you want to play that game, check it out. But what were you gonna say?
Fifth edition. We're in the
Fifth.
fifth edition
Oh,
now.
the 5th edition. I see that it's on Amazon. It says 4th, so
Yeah.
5th
You can
edition.
still buy the fourth edition, probably cheaper, but the fifth edition is the one that's out there now.
Good
Yeah.
deal. Is there a website or a social media channel that you recommend people to find you on?
Not really. I'm a professor at the University of South Florida, and I would tell any of your listeners, if either they or they've got a family member that's interested in thinking about entering the sports world, there are a lot of ways to do it. We feel like we do it really well here in Tampa, and we train students. Our thing is all about experiential learning. We spend a lot of time with having students work on real world projects with teams or leagues or organizations. So when they go out on the job market, they're viable. Our placement rate is in the 90%, which is really hard to do. And so I would just say, if someone that's listening to this wants to think about sports business education, they can find our program. It's at the University of South Florida, the Vinik program, and we'd love to talk to you.
Beautiful. Check them out. I would assume that your favorite movie of all time has to be Moneyball. Is it? Come on, it's got to be because it taught me more about sport finance than any other movie I know out there. So,
It's good. It's good. I actually tried. I didn't get him. I tried multiple times to get Billy Bean to come down. We traded some information, but we just couldn't get the timing. It took. I run an analytics conference every spring down here in Tampa, and so would have been nice to get Billy to come down, but we couldn't make that work. So maybe
oh
after
man.
seeing this, they'll want to do it.
Well, is there any other name or any other owner that was just mind blowing that you're able to meet and talk to and maybe work with that stands out in addition to the Tampa Bay owner?
Well, another person that I met, I've been blessed to meet a lot of people over time. Very impressive people. Some people you meet, you hear about, and then you meet them, and it's not really the same. There's a gentleman on the West Coast now. His name's Todd Lywicki, and he is running out with the expansion Seattle Kraken in the NHL. He was also with the Tampa Bay Lightning. One story about Todd is, and this is a great lesson for your listeners, is Todd had to drop out of high school and to support his family. His mother was sick, and so he didn't even get to go to college. He barely got a high school degree. But if you talk to people in the sports industry of the most, visionary entrepreneurs, leaders, his name comes up constantly. And his brother, Tim Lywicki, is with a company called Oakview Group on the West Coast. And between those two, it's pretty amazing what they've accomplished. But Todd, especially not having a college degree, it's look, I'm an advocate of education, but you can go be successful in whatever field you choose to do if you've got the right work ethic and skill set and people skills. So
I call entrepreneurship the great equalizer. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you know. If you have work ethic, drive, and a vision, man, you can inspire and motivate a lot of people, but also change the environment around you. It's great.
yeah, no question.
Guys, the book is called Sport Finance. Pick it up on Amazon and get in touch with Mike Mondello. He's easy to find if you just go on LinkedIn. I think is the way we found you. So easy to find and obviously knows his stuff. So thanks so much for being here, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Great to be here, Mike. Appreciate the invite.
Well, remember, guys, $1 million book will lead to $1 million life. Right on.